Good evening. My name is Bethany Costello. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Community Partnerships here at RISD, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2023 MLK Keynote panel. We're going to begin in a couple of minutes, but I need to do a couple of housekeeping things for you. At this time, we ask that you please find your seats and silence all cell phones and mobile devices. Live captions are available via the link on the screen. If you are having issues accessing the captioning service through your phone browser during the program, please raise your hand and one of our event coordinators will assist you. In the event of an emergency, please take a moment to locate the exit nearest to you. The accessible exit is to your left behind the stage. It is now my pleasure to introduce President Crystal Williams.
Good evening. You all were a little rowdy on the front end. It's all right. Welcome back. Elizabeth Malowski, thank you very much for your work here tonight. So I want to welcome you all to the 11th annual MLK Series Keynote event. Welcome in particular to our RISD students, staff, faculty, and alumni, and those joining us from Brown. I just met a really brilliant PhD student from Brown, and other fellow institutions of higher learning, as well as the community at large. And of course, our warmest greetings to our distinguished guest, Thelma Golden. I will just say, knowing how busy Thelma is, we are exceedingly lucky to have her with us tonight, and I am so appreciative that you joined us. I'm thrilled and eager for Thelma to share her inspiring presence and words with us tonight. Just a couple of notes about the MLK series broadly. Every year, RISD hosts a series of special events that honor the life and contributions and enduring legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Some events occur within RISD and for only RISD audiences. Other events are extremely focused and externally focused and engage our broader Providence community and neighbors and the world of art and design. And this one event is a combination of those two. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge our city council person here on the east side. So there are many people in this audience, and I'm happy about that. I think it's important that we all together think through the legacy of Dr. King. This event provides an intentional moment of community, one that brings together new and long-standing friends of RISD and seekers of justice. Among them, again, RISD students, staff, faculty, trustees, and alumni. Its purpose was penned in 2012, so we're in 23 now, so that's what, I'm doing poet math. What is that, 11 years? Thank you, Tony. So it was penned in 2012 when the MLK series was started to celebrate, to invoke, service, to engender learning, and to inspire. Established 4 years before RISD launched its first social equity and inclusion plan, the MLK series has been emblematic of RISD's commitment to these core principles. In the 10 years, so somebody missed this, in the 11 years of the MLK series in-person lectures, more than 5,000 people have sat in these same seats to hear, learn, seek inspiration from, and hear calls to action regarding our nation's justice champions. Over that time period, this series has put us in dialogue with international humanitarians, child advocates, artists, designers, colleagues of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., philosophers, and on. May what you and we collectively engage tonight compel us to deepen our commitments, to clarify our opportunities, to use our gifts towards inclusion, equity, and change, and to do that in service also of art and design. A few moments and words of thanks. So I want to thank Assistant Vice President for Social Equity and Inclusion, and Associate Dean for Student Social Equity and Inclusion, Tony Johnson. I also want to thank Interim Assistant Provost for Social Equity and Inclusion, Stanley Walukau Wanambwa. SEI Fellow Zoe Samutsi. Staff members Mia Nilo and Katrin Livingston, who really helped make this thing go. And myriad staff across campus who came together to make tonight's event possible. Additional thanks to Stanley Walukau Wanambwa for serving as RISD's host during Thelma Golden's day-long campus engagement, and to SEI Fellow Nichole Rustin for joining us and for joining Thelma in conversation this evening. In conclusion, I want to welcome Zoe Pulley, MFA in Graphic Design, class of 23. I want to welcome Zoe to the podium for introductions of tonight's panelists. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, President Williams, for that lovely introduction. And yes, I have the honors tonight to introduce our keynote speaker. But first I'm gonna, of course, just flip to the page so I have a reference here. Yes, so good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's MLK event and to introduce you to tonight's speakers. Before I do, I would like to call your attention to one program change in our event. Zoe Samunzi, originally one of the moderators for this evening, is unfortunately unable to join us. We wish her well and thank her for her support that she has given in tonight's success. I am, however, thrilled to introduce Nichole Rustin, who will guide our discussion tonight. Nichole, Assistant Professor and SEI Fellow, is a scholar of Black feminism, cultural history, law, gender, jazz, and sound studies. Rustin is the author of The Kind of Man I Am, Jazz, Masculinity, and the World of Charles Mingus Jr., and co-editor of Big Ears, Listening for Gender in Jazz Studies, the first collection of work in jazz and gender studies, and the Routledge Companion to Jazz Studies, an anthology of cross-disciplinary and transnational studies in jazz. She has published work in critical sociology, South Atlantic Quarterly, and other places. Her essay, Jazz Feminism, is to the soul as purple is to lavender, was recently published in Jazz and Culture. She's on the editorial board of Journal of Jazz Studies. And with that, please welcome Nichole to the stage. I am continually amazed by the way in which the subject of race can take itself in many places that we don't imagine it should be. These are the words of Thelma Golden, the director and chief curator of the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the person in which I have the esteemed privilege of introducing this evening. Thelma Golden is a child of New York, hailing from Southeast Queens, where she was raised by her mother from Bed-Stuy and her father from Harlem. Golden's childhood was one immersed with Black culture by means of theater, music, and dance. Although Golden says she did not learn of the word curator until the age of 12, her experiences provided by way of her parents, education, and innate interest in art led her to pursue her bachelor's in art history and African American studies from Smith College in 1987. After graduating, she returned to her father's stomping grounds of Harlem and began her curatorial career as an intern at the Studio Museum, an institution founded in 1968 by artists, community activists, and philanthropists with the intention to display and support artists and arts education. She then joined the Whitney Museum of Art as a curator, beginning the crux of her curatorial practice, which has championed the work of emerging Black artists from all corners of the African diaspora. During her tenure, she organized several groundbreaking exhibitions, including Black Male, representations of masculinity in American art, and the Whitney's famous 1993 biennial, showcasing work by artists such as Glenn Ligon, Lorna Simpson, Gary Simmons, and Allison Sarr. Golden later returned to her current outpost of the Studio Museum in 2000, first as the Deputy Director for Exhibitions and Programs, and then as the Director in 2005. Under her leadership, she has continued to uphold the legacy intended by the museum's forebearers, while expanding, responding, and strengthening the museum's presence within Harlem's local community and the world. In her 2001 exhibition titled Freestyle, Golden worked with artist and collaborator Glenn Ligon to coin the term post-Black, an ideology rooted in the want by artists to not solely be referenced under the monolithic label of Black artists, but instead to be recognized for their unique and complex understandings of Blackness and identity. This principle has become a foundational piece of the museum's ethos through Golden's commitment to creating access, planning for the future, and always staying grounded in community. Golden has received many a notable accolade, including honorary doctorates from City College of New York, Smith College, Moore College of Art and Design. She gave an influential 2009 TED Talk titled How Art Gives Shape to Cultural Change, as well as being appointed by President Barack Obama to the Committee for Preservation of the White House in 2010. But amongst all of these incredible achievements in her still ever-evolving career, Golden remains inspired not only by the Studio Museum's legacy, but what that legacy represents for so many of us. To again quote Thelma, "To work at an institution like the Studio Museum that has a life that is so grounded in where it is, some of what gives me life is the fact that when people interact with me about the museum, people acknowledge our existence. They acknowledge that our existence is a gift." Speaking as a Black female artist myself in a world that can ask so much in order to just exist, I am grateful for the work of Thelma Golden and that a space like the Studio Museum allows for folks like me to not merely be seen, but allows us to just be. And with that, it is my pleasure to welcome RISD's 2023 MLK lecturer, Thelma Golden.
I think it's on. Is it on? Hello.
Are we on? Okay.
We're on.
Fantastic. I'm so glad to be here and to see all of you. I was just speaking with Spencer Evans from EFS, and he was saying how nice it is to be back in touch with our community after the holiday break. And it's so great to be able to celebrate MLK with you. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. You already know that I fangirled a little bit over there, and we'll talk about it some more. But welcome very much.
Well, thank you. First, good evening. I'm from Harlem, so that was necessary that we speak to each other first. So I want to start with some gratitude. Thank you, Nichole. Thank you, Zoe, for that fantastic introduction. Thank you, President Williams, for this space. I want to thank Kajet and Tony for the incredible way in which I've had an entire day here on this campus in the museum. Thank you to Stanley and so many more. I know so many people made this moment possible, so I just want to start by really thanking you all.
Thank you. Well, and when I planned my questions, I really did want to organize them around the name Studio Museum in Harlem as a way of structuring But as my handwritten notes suggest, it may not be that obvious, but that's where I'm going with it. But I wanted to first talk about public art, especially since Hank Willis Thomas's new sculpture, The Embrace, has just been revealed in Boston. And there's been some kind of critical back and forth about what this image represents. And I'm just wondering if you might reflect a bit before we go further in talking about how the Studio Museum presents public work, about the fact that The Embrace has just been revealed.
Well, I think what, thinking about Hank's sculpture being revealed, what I think about is it's really an example of an important place we are now, and that is the rethinking of not simply what public art is, but what monuments are. And I think that we know that there's so much reparative work that needs to happen when we think about who is memorialized in public space, in stone, or steel, that we understand that the real transformation, right, of our public spaces is going to come with new thoughts about what that can be. And I think that the actuality of Hank's sculpture, the process that went into making it, and the conversation it is creating is important. I think that art should be a conversation point. When I was growing up, my parents were deeply invested in Black culture, but they were more involved in theater and music, dance. So growing up in New York City, I had the gift of seeing Alvin Ailey and Dance Theater of Harlem and the National Black Theater, and and the Negro Ensemble Company, and that was my formation. So visual art didn't really come into my life except through field trips to museums at school, but I loved it and got my parents to take us. But really the point at which I understood the deep complexity and power of contemporary art came through my church. I was raised a Black Presbyterian, which is kind of like being a Unitarian in the scope of thinking about Black religious traditions. 60-minute service, not too much, movement, praying is something you did to yourself, and all. But a beautiful space that was invested in deep ideas of philosophical thought, right? So space in which Howard Thurman existed. So I grew up with this great tradition of faith leaders who were intellectuals. And so we had a minister, Reverend Glamison, and the church got renovated, and behind the choir loft now, instead of the big old-fashioned organ, there was maybe a smaller one. So there was all this wall space, and he engaged in a process to commission a work of art. Okay, now I'm talking, this is 1970s Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, all right? Commissioned a work of art. And after a process, he picked a work that was an abstraction meant to invoke the infiniteness of spirit, right? It was bronze, and it had a sort of curving sort of way, and it caused so much controversy in the church. I mean, the conversations, pro and con, those who thought it was wonderful, those who thought it was awful, the idea that everybody should have a stake, right, in understanding. But what for me was so interesting as a 10-year-old was the way in which it provoked the space itself for conversation. So I think that, art in public spaces has that potential, right, to be a catalyst for the thinking about so much and in so many ways.
Well, that also leads me to kind of the beginning history of the Studio Museum in Harlem and thinking about the Smokehouse Associates and their work doing public art in Harlem, public murals. And Providence has a lot of murals throughout the city. And William T. Williams, who was one of those artists in the collective, was also the kind of brain behind the studio's residency program and the idea of making experiments in art and seeing what happens. So I would love to talk about the importance of community in the specific locations of Harlem as a place to be. You've called Harlem the prepositional problematic, right? Because sometimes people get it correct that it's the Studio Museum in Harlem, but other times it's called Studio Museum of Harlem. And you kind of like that dynamic because it opens up many ways to understand how the museum sits in the community, but also beyond the community. So that's probably like 5 questions.
It is. So give me one, Nichole. Let me see if I can make
But
one
maybe
of those.
start with the beginning of the museum and the Smokehouse Associates, which I just looked at that catalog, and it was so beautiful to...
Yeah, so thank you. You know, what I think is a great gift is that the founders of the Studio Museum in Harlem sort of put mission in our name, right? Everything about how we were named was a way for us to literally, in the speaking of it, say what it is we are meant to do. And so at our founding, I think it was incredibly important that studio, right, that we be called the Studio Museum, because the museum always saw itself directly aligned with artist practice, which was an idea that was a rethinking of museum. So that is, it did not want to see itself as only as a repository of objects, but a space aligned with artists. But also, in 1969, to then be the Studio Museum in Harlem, it was, again, speaking to a present but also a past, but I also say into a future. So that is, at that time, to situate in the geography of Harlem was to be involved in the conversation about a community that was in deep distress, and really in a deep space of thinking about its reinvention. But it also was claiming a very important past, right? The place that birthed the Harlem Renaissance, a community that lives in the imagination, you know, as a representation of 20th century sort of blackness. And so, you know, I think that studio was sort of a way to say, you know, what we would do and for who, but the in Harlem was to ground it, not just in geographic space, but I often feel in kind of psychic and intellectual space, right? To represent, you know, saying that the Studio Museum in Harlem attaching itself to this historic sensibility around formations of Black identities.
Yeah, there are so many institutions that surround the Studio Museum and speak to that history that you're talking about. I'll tell everyone that I know constantly that I was born in the Bronx, and that's a particular identity, but also I spent a lot of time in Harlem, including taking dance classes at the Ruth Williams Dance Studio in the Hotel Teresa. And, you know, the Schomburg, the YMCA, that was so important during the Harlem Renaissance, the National Black Theater. All of these institutions really lived in that community and that psychic identity. So it is really important to have that space, which is opening up the visual arts, as you say, right? Because where would that have been for us before then, at that moment in time? So I love the idea that the museum claimed its both geographical location, the importance of that history, as well as the psychic history. And that kind of leads me a bit to thinking about the ways that the museum has put public art in Harlem, in the parks, in Marcus Garvey Park and St. Nicholas Park, thinking about Thomas Price and Marion Hessinger and Chloe Bess and Simone Leigh, just some of those people. So I'd love if you could talk about that, and thinking as well about Thomas Price talks about the connection between Harlem and Brixton, right? And that as a psychic connection for him to be able to create while he's, you know, because of COVID in England, but build something that's tied to Harlem because of its psychic energy rather.
Yes, no. It is, a great gift to be able to work in Harlem and serve in Harlem, right? And to be, in the streets of Harlem, understanding all that has come before. And that definitely inspires so much of our work. But our move into intentional public work, citing it in the parks of Harlem, really was not only a desire to be able to offer artists that opportunity to engage with audiences in these public spaces in Harlem, but also for us, the museum, to do that. And that came because we closed in 2018 our physical building to build a new building. And while we were closed, we knew we had to think about how we would engage. And so we created an interconnected set of initiatives, all under the banner called In Harlem, coming from our name, the Studio Museum in Harlem. So quite literally to think about what it would be for us to plan, present, and program in Harlem. And we've done some incredible projects, and they've been wonderful to engage with, because for visitors to the museum, longtime visitors, it was a different way to be with us, but for many people, it was an introduction. Mm-hmm. Even though we had been in the community 49 years, right, at the moment that we closed, still, for some, Harlemites, they had never had the experience of the Studio Museum. So these projects were a way to meet many new people and to do it in public space. The Thomas Price Project, which is the most recent and closed in October, with an artist, Black British artist, based, in London. I think for him it was about this way which that we can begin to think about the global Black presence, mm-hmm. and different kinds of Black urban existences, but the ways in which they do speak to each other. Mm-hmm. So that while Harlem holds so much African American history, Brixton, of course, holds so much, history in Afro and Caribbean Brits, and the way in which it's the familiar same, but not exactly. And so Thomas working, bringing his sculpture, which looked like it could reflect an experience of Harlem, but was one that was echoing or resonant of that as he was coming out of another context. It was incredible and amazing and wonderful for us to, be able to allow that kind of exchange with an artist, with audience.
Mm-hmm. So, two things kind of come out of that as well. One has to do with the impact of COVID on your programming, the ability to do the work that you do, but also recognizing that the museum had already been closed physically before COVID, because you started planning the new building in 2015, I believe. And I'd like to kind of talk a bit about those first homes for the museum. One which was a loft space, and you have talked about how the front of the loft, where the windows were, is where the exhibition space was, and then the back of the loft is where artists were. And so people in the community could really engage with both. And then the most recent building was, I think, a former bank building that the architect Jane Max Bond adapted to suit the needs of the museum. And now you're constructing this new space under the design vision of Sir David Adjaye. And I'd love to hear about that. I was telling Tony that I was in New York over the weekend, and I drove past the museum, and it was so fantastic and really almost overwhelming to see how much more of a presence the museum will have on 125th Street, because I do agree that before it was a little hard for people to understand where it was, So, if we could talk about the history of the space and how it came, this new vision of what the space could be.
Yeah, thank you. I think our relationship to space says so much about, the sort of intentions and the focus of our founders. Because our first space, we call it a loft because that is an architectural type. Now, it was the second floor of a building. You know what I mean? It wasn't a loft, it was the second floor. At the street level was a liquor store, and then to the right of the liquor store was a door, and on top of that door was a little sign that said, the Studio Museum in Harlem. And I love everything about that, right? Meaning the intention, the aspiration, the flex that said, we know this isn't a museum, but it's a museum. Because we say it's a museum, and we are going to make museum. It's like folks in Harlem, say church is not the physical structure, right? It's how we gather. They were saying, this is museum, right? This space that you walked up the stairs. And also, from a curatorial and artistic vision, there was an incredible amount of complexity and sophistication going on, right? But with also an incredible amount of improvisation, right? So the ability to think about how the public program would happen was always changing and forming. Now, I'm saying all this, I didn't experience this, and this is all what I know, because again, the experience of that space was so profound that people talk about it. They have to me since I was a 19-year-old Smith College student who was an intern at the Studio Museum. And you know how I always know I don't go to an HBCU? Because if I had just said Spelman, like 5 people would have been like, yeah. And I know no, it's true. This is so like polite Seven Sisters, and I know there are Smithies in the room, so I'm gonna say it again. When I was at Smith College, where's Margot? I know, I need my Smithies. Anyway, from the time, I just had to say that though, because I really do often have a little bit of like, because my father went to Howard. See, no, exactly. See, no, Howard has a particular thing, right? What is it? It's like HU, right? And I grew up with that, but like we don't even have a thing at Smith. Problem. Okay. So from the time I engaged with the Studio Museum, I, was always given the sense of not just the experience of the art, but the experience of the place, right? It was spoken about with such specificity. And for me, it is a way in which I understand place making and space making, right? That it's not, just the bricks and mortar. The second museum space, the museum acquired in 1979, and I use that word because when we talk about the history of institutions devoted to the arts and artists of color, more often than not, those histories often get complicated around issues of real estate, right? That is, we occupy spaces, our theaters, dance companies, museums, but we rent them quite often in neighborhoods that we help change, and then we can't afford to stay in them, right? And so then we remember someone says, oh yeah, there was a dance company, there was a theater company, but they are no longer. So that's why I always very specifically and perhaps slightly pretentiously always say the Studio Museum acquired the building in 1979 because they bought it. And this is where I also have to call out names because I am part of a lineage. I have completely am in a path made by others. So that was done by the director of the Studio Museum at that time, Dr. Mary Schmidt-Campbell. Dr. Campbell bought that building on 125th Street, 144 West 125th, former bank building built in 1914 as the New York Bank for Savings, abandoned as so much commercial real estate was in the 60s. People ran away from it, left it, company. And Mary and the board of the museum at that time understood what it was to invest in the neighborhood. So bought the building for a very small amount of money, almost nothing, which again, value in our community. I always say that, the Studio Museum didn't start with a collection or a fortune, but we had an incredible amount of cultural capital.
Right.
So the buying of the building and the renovating of the building to allow us, again, to make museum in a space that was not meant to be one, but that we occupied joyfully for many years. But it was an old building, right? So the roof, not good, the basement, all of it. And it meant that a lot of time and even more money was spent trying to patch it and keep it up. And it didn't feel as if our future could be confined by what were the confines of an old building. And that's what initiated a project to now build this new state-of-the-art, our first purpose-built building in our history by David Adjaye. And sometime in the future, we will be open.
Well, I love too that you talk about this new building in terms of stage, stoop, sanctuary, street, stage, stoop. Or I'm mixing them up because Ajay added in the stoop, exactly. Right? And you've talked about a particular vendor outside the building who would play Al Green.
Mm-hmm. Well, different songs, different seasons.
Different songs, different seasons. But I'm thinking about, will there still be that space for him to return? Like, is it still a space that the community can recognize themselves in, or to claim space within this new, really awesome, structure?
Yes.
Yes.
Our goal, our intention, our purpose is to continually be, as our founders wanted us to be, in Harlem, and continue to exist of Harlem. So much of the design is made to create the most sense of porousness between Harlem, as it lives on the street, and the building, the Studio Museum in Harlem. And, so much of our work before and when we reopen will be to continue to hold space for community. But it has to be said, like I can't, I, more than anyone, romanticize, right? Yeah. What it is to think about Harlem, but it is a transforming and changing community. So what that means even is something that has to be thought of in the present, right? Because it is constantly changing. So when we reopen, what it means to create space for the community is going to have to be responsive to the Harlem that's even different than the one that existed when we closed. Right. And, but that's also what's so interesting about being a cultural anchor in a community, being an institution that has watched, right, change and has reimagined itself to respond at each moment in ways that provide a sense of, possibility for our many communities to continue to have a space that is defined by the work of Black artists, but definitely inspired by the space created by the culture of our neighborhood of Harlem.
Part of during this time that the museum itself is closed, you've had collaborations around the city. So like the last year, studio residents are having their show at MoMA PS1, and you've done collaborations for exhibits by Rodney McMillan and Jam at MoMA, and Just Above Midtown, founded by Linda Goodbryant. And I'd like to think about the studio in partnership with these institutions that historically, from the founding, a lot of what motivated the exhibitions and the founding has been the absence of Black presence in those institutions. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what it means to partner in this much more equal way, or, yeah.
Yeah, I love partnership. And when it was clear that we would be closed, for some years, it was always important to me that we could continue not only to serve audience with programs like In Harlem, but we could continue to serve artists, continue exhibition making and interpreting through education programs and public programs. And it also felt, in a way, secretly, maybe even interesting to be able to do that in other places and spaces, it's like anything. We'd lived in our house for a long time and been doing the work that we did. And so to begin to think about who we were in other places allowed us, all kinds of reimagining that I can only hope is going to impact the way we open up again, right? After having, this moment in the world. Some of the partnerships were practical, right? Like based on needs and space, and some are more from the perspective that you say of just thinking about museums differently. So for example, the Frick Museum is also closed and doing a major expansion project designed by the architect Annabelle Seldorf. And because it was happening somewhat in alignment, though we are two very different museums, we also are similar in certain ways. We're both sited deeply in neighborhoods. This issue of closing would impact these, very fiercely loyal, specific kinds of member groups we have. And so the director of the Frick and I had an occasion, first because it was, in pandemic, virtually, to do a talk with each other about just building projects, but with both groups of our members, and have continued to think about ways to engage in this moment. So some, come from that possibility, but, and some are with our Harlem peers, and as you said, we work in community with some amazing cultural institutions in Harlem. Dance Theater of Harlem, Harlem Stage, National Black Theater, Jazzmobile, the National Jazz Museum, Harlem School for the Arts, Studio Museum in Harlem, Apollo Theater, Schomburg Center for Research and Black Culture, I think I said that. And so many more. And so the other thing I have to say about this moment, it really has also allowed us to be grateful for so much collegial generosity. So, in the way that we exist in Harlem among our peer institutions like family, there it was very casual. What do you all need?
Yeah.
Use our space. When, how, and that also has been a gift, that for the things that maybe are not even planned, but the ability, and it's hard not to, have a museum. Even for me, it's why, I so love spending time in, other people's museum, and had a great time today walking around the RISD Museum, because I miss, what it is to walk into, a guided tour, as I did today, or to speak to those who, make our art spaces safe, but, have perspective because they're in those rooms, to watch, audience. A real big museum director flex is that you can call your colleagues and go to museums when they're not open. And many museums love that alone. I don't like being in museums alone. I like to be in museums when audiences are there. I like to see people in museums and engage in that way. So I miss that. So these partnerships also allow all of us, everyone in the Studio Museum team, no matter what we do, to continue to be able to have perspective on it through working with our peers and sharing some of this work.
Thank you. That brings me as well to thinking about your career shift from curator to institution builder. And I heard you once say that as a curator, you kind of imagined yourself as the love child of Adrian Piper and Glenn Ligon, which I thought...
If I said that, I didn't mean to.
But I kind of love it because she, I get it. I understand what you mean, and she's, a product of Harlem in so many ways. But you also talk about yourself as a conduit.
Yeah. No, I think what it is, I love being a curator. I'm not going to say it in the past tense, though it is somewhat. As I said, grew up in New York City. I went to high school on the Upper East Side in, again, the 80s. Almost all the museums in New York had funding in some way to make admission free for high school students. So that, I went to the Whitney Museum through the early 80s, saw those biennials. I was in the high school program at the Met, went to the drop-in high school programs everywhere else. And, by the time I was, a junior, maybe senior in high school, I knew I wanted to be a curator. I wrote it in my college application essay. So, what that means is that, in so many ways, the fact that I went from high school going to the 83 biennial, that I was curator in the curatorial team of the 93 biennial means, that I live definitely understanding, right, about, when our path, right, is created for us, right, and we are walking, right, in purpose in that way. So I think that I've always thought like a curator, and I continue to, though my job right now is being director of the Studio Museum. And I don't miss curating, right, in the big way, simply because obviously, I get the opportunity to steward an institution, a fantastic group of curators, and to continue to engage with what ultimately, and perhaps that's what that quote was about, what ultimately is my ultimate inspiration, and that's artists, right? I continue to be able to create space for artists, right? It's not the space of exhibition making, but it is in this creating of institution, of creating of space that makes, the opportunities, of this moment real for artists.
You just mentioned the 93 Whitney Biennial, and I was fangirling and having Thelma sign my Black male catalog, which was really important to me as a graduate student at the time that it came out, because I was also working on a dissertation about Black masculinity. So to have this was so inspirational. It opened up so many ways for me to think about how does one talk about gender and masculinity. And so I've just fangirled about that. I don't know if I have a question or not, but
Can I say something about that?
Please.
So, as a curator, really for me, my own sort of curatorial mission was to create exhibitions that could change the space of museums, the conversation about art, and the ways in which we could engage with the many issues in our world and each other through art. And Black male did that, right? I got to see that happen in the day-to-day life of that exhibition on the walls in New York, and then in LA. I went to LA in '95. But that exhibition opened almost 30 years ago. A lifetime ago. I had an incredible lunch today with some fantastic students, and none of them were born, right, when this exhibition happened. But what makes me proud every day, and what I'm so grateful for, is it still lives in the world. And a very particular reason for that is for what's in your lap. Can I hold that for 1 second? It's because of this book. This volume, which lives, I'm going to start crying. That's why I can't look over here. That lives for me so significantly, because what I could do with this, right, at that moment, right, this exhibition of these 28 artists looking at Black masculinity, but really talking about, what it meant to consider Blackness in America through art. But the way that this book traveled, the number of people who've done what you have done, and that would not have been possible without Bethany Johns. Bethany, stand up. Bethany, no. I am so glad Bethany got to see this happen. Bethany, this has happened to me for 30 years. People have held this as a precious document. And you made that possible for me by creating this beautiful, strong, super gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous book. So thank you.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you learned from the previous directors of the Studio Museum. You worked for a while. You mentioned Mary Schmidt-Campbell, and you came to the museum with Laurie Stokes-Sims. So I wonder if you could talk about them.
Well, first, just that, right? That I get to lead this institution in the path of three incredible women before me. Mary Schmidt-Campbell, who was director from 77 to 88, hired me as an intern and then brought me back as a fellow when I graduated from, I'm going to give you all a chance now, Smith College.
Woo!
Okay. I then was a fellow at the museum in 88 when Conchasha Holman-Conwell was director. She was director until 98. In 98, that decade I was working at the Whitney. In 99, I got a call letting me know that Dr. Laurie Stokes-Sims, who'd been a friend and a mentor my whole career, was going to become the director of the Studio Museum in Harlem, and I had a chance to engage in a conversation about being deputy director and chief curator. That happened. Laurie and I started the same day at the Studio Museum, January 3rd, 2000. And in July of 2006, I became director. So the last 3 directors I've had a direct relationship with. And I got to see them directing the Studio Museum. So I had a whole example. I mean, I often say, and not facetiously at all, so much of what at core I try to do every day is to simply honor the efforts that they made, right? Because so much of this moment will get talked about around me and building this building, but there would be no building this building had we not bought the building in '79, had the institution not got accreditation when Kinshasa was director so that we could exist within this museum field, if Lowry had not hired me to be chief curator, and then she set a path to have this incredible growth of the museum in her 5 years as director, to then be able to think about a future and say, yes, we can build a building. So I am grateful to them all. I'm thrilled that I know them all. And I just hope every day to make them feel that the efforts they made are bearing the fruit, right, of the seeds that all of them planted.
I have one last question before we open it up. And I was recently reading Elizabeth Alexander's, the poet's new book, The Trayvon Generation, where she makes the argument about the importance of art at this moment. And she also writes as a mother, as a poet. And she says, I wish for our young people freedom of movement, of thought, of imagination. I wish also for our young people rest from the unending labor that is race work, and from the special anxiety that is part of what it is to be Black. And I'm wondering, what do you wish for RISD students as they are about to embark on their journeys outside of this institution?
Oh, I think I just wish for them the space to create. I really do, you know? And I think it is hard to make that space, you know? It's why places like the Studio Museum were founded. But I just hope for more of it so that they can create.
Great. Well,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are now open for questions from the audience, and I believe there are mic runners around. And wave vigorously at me so I can see you to call on you. Okay, well, hold on. Down front? Okay. Well, wait for your mic. Right.
Hi. I was at the lunch earlier today, and it's so good to see you again. I love your dress. I guess my question is kind of like looking into the future, like, you know, accessing your wildest dreams. What kind of, do you want, like, what improvements do you want to see brought to the museum, like museum space, new spaces, new, like anything like that?
Big question. So just for clarity, for what do I want to see for the Studio Museum or museums generally?
I guess both. I guess the Studio Museum specifically and museums more generally.
Yeah. Well, I say more generally is what I hope for us, but for me, I'm working towards, right, our hope. I want museums, writ large, to be open and accessible. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that means many things, but I think if we start beginning to think about exactly what it has to mean, and that becomes the norm, not the exception, right, so that it has to be named, right, access, right, but that it's what it is, that's what I want, right? I want everyone to be able to experience museums with the least barriers possible, and to have that be everywhere, right? And to begin, again, in the spirit of the founders of the Studio Museum, to understand that we can make museum anywhere, right? And maybe not necessarily always privilege these current models. That's what I hope for.
Thank you. President Williams has a question.
Uh-oh.
Incoherent though it may be. Thelma, you're such a powerful thinker. I'm interested in your thinking about King's legacy, justice, and art. How do you put those three things together, both as a curator, as a leader in the arts, et cetera?
Yes, well, President Williams, that's not an easy question, but I appreciate it. No, I appreciate it for, what it makes me have to reflect on. So I think how I might answer that is to just start with like King's legacy. And not ironically, but the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture has mugs and tote bags that says, Black history, 365 days a year. And thank you. And see, I was saying that on behalf of the Schomburg, even though it's not my bag, but thank you. And what I say is that to me is sort of the way in which I think in community, as I have come to experience it in Harlem, that we live King's legacy, right? That it is not something that is specific, right? But it's broadly how we walk through the world if we believe in justice, right? Through, the ethics that King represented. But it also means that we understand the complexities in that and know that then to imagine that we are living in the legacy created by King, that we also have to, right, be willing in community to think about those complexities, right, and acknowledge them and work through them with each other. And that is the place at which I think art always gives us those lessons, right? How to reach into complexity, how to sit with discomfort, but how to imagine futures before they can be enacted. So I think I connect, King, justice, art through this arc of the way in which I understand my own relationship to why art is important to me, in that it allows me, to envision and to engage and to do so in ways that are profound, not just for my singular humanity, but for humanity writ large.
Thank you. Chris, and then we'll do you.
Thank you all for this presentation and conversation. I actually maybe want to follow up on President Williams' question in a way, thinking about Dr. King, specifically in the letter from a Birmingham jail when he talks about his concerns around waiting. And he specifically says that in his experience, wait usually means never. And I'm thinking about sort of the current period we're in where there's so much tension around conversations, whether they be around race, gender, identity, and power. And you coming from an institution where you all have not historically waited to have these conversations, have not waited to sort of center certain artists and sort of put things on the forefront. What perspective do you think you can offer about maybe the importance of not waiting for something to be okay or not waiting for the right moment? Again, given the specific lineage institutionally that you kind of sit in as an institution and someone leading an institution that historically has not waited for something to be okay to discuss. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate, the acknowledgement of, again, this force, right? The life force of the institution that sort of, created space, right, before anyone imagined it could exist. But I think that comes, out of a kind of necessity, right? The necessity that exists in the culture very broadly. And again, it's why, my own engagement as a curator in the work by artists of African descent is because so much of it, right, is about these imaginings before there's anything that says they should be possible. So what advice do we have? I guess I don't know that we can show other institutions anything, but I do think, I am constantly aware of how special it is to have different institutional models. And the culturally specific institution model is, very particular. And I value that, right? I don't, it's a long way to say, sometimes it looks like what people want to imagine our trajectory should be is that we are the Studio Museum in Harlem now, but then we'll become the Metropolitan Museum of Harlem. And that isn't it at all, right? It is that we will become whatever version of the particular thing we are. I mean, I used to love it. My dear, beloved, late brother, Greg Tate, who named the exhibition Blackmail, let me say that in this room. Tate used to call us the Black MoMA. Now, when Tate said it, I didn't mind that, right? Because, but again, he understood how, in some ways, no, not, right? We are the Studio Museum, right? And so that's where I think maybe the example is. It is in understanding that all institutions can exist within their specificity, and often that specificity can be their power.
We have a question here in the front.
What's good, y'all? People love to talk, and especially around MLK and around this time of the year, I find that people like to use conversation and dialogue as an excuse to not do action. I believe that we as artists have the capacity to not only put words in the mouth, but boots on the ground. What do you think that looks like, and how do you think we can get there?
Well, I think we have a whole history of that. I mean, look at the work of women artists, queer artists, artists of color. There's a whole trajectory in which for over a century, right, artists have used their work as a way, again, to create conversations that didn't exist, but also to prompt action. And so I think it is, if your own artistic calling is that, if you see your own artistic voice as being aligned with activism, then do it. You are working in a tradition that is rich and deep and very powerful. So I see that as just a reflection of acknowledging that past, but also knowing that we continue to exist in a space where, artists in many ways are great activists.
We have one question in the row back here and one there. And I don't know if I had missed people in the upper rows. I see one in the upper row up there, so those are at least our three.
Hello, hi. I'm really excited to see you today. I just want to go back to a point during this talk where you talked about as our communities change and how sort of the Studio Museum is responding to that. There was an article that came out at The Atlantic called The Sound of Gentrification, something like that. I think the headline was The Sound of Gentrification is Silence. And we see across the US many communities, especially historically Black communities, shifting and changing as different demographics are entering. And the Studio Museum in Harlem is an historically Black museum catered to Black artists and artists of the diaspora. So I guess my question to you is, as that community is changing, how are we responding to it, and how are we able to bring and attract more Black audiences? I worked briefly at the Contemporary Austin, and one of the main issues with the city that's Black community is decreasing was that, the staff really struggled to bring in a Black audience and for people to feel like that space was accessible to them. And so how do we maintain that as Harlem's community is unfortunately changing and kind of make people understand that this space is still very much so accessible to them?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. And those are, the deeply important questions. And I think really maybe most specifically the way in which we think about that is through this question of access. So yes, Harlem is changing, demographics are changing. And in New York, not just Harlem, but the city as a whole. So for example, over our life, our audiences have gotten wider, say citywide. So that when we think about, audiences of color, we're not just thinking about Harlem anymore. We're thinking about the Bronx. We're thinking about, Queens. We're thinking about Brooklyn. We're thinking about Staten Island. I'm that New Yorker. I always have to remember, right? don't not say Staten Island when you go through all the boroughs, right? So we think about Staten Island, and we think about, what then are the ways, right, that we have to continue to keep audiences coming. But at the same time, we acknowledge the gentrification, and we realize, well, what role do we have being an anchor to allow people to experience the community they have entered? And that's one of the things that's special about Harlem, with this, deep core of cultural institutions, that no matter how much it gentrifies, there isn't a way not to walk past the Apollo Theater, the Cathedral of Black Music, right, and not feel, right, what it means for that space to have been there almost 100 years. So that's the other part of where we see ourselves as cultural anchors. That we understand when Whole Foods was coming to the corner of Lenox and 125th, our block, I was very pleased when I, met some of their executives, and they told me that the way people were orienting them when they said where they were, they would say, oh, the Studio Museum block. I said, yes, right? Right? Understanding, again, this idea of, territory and what defines it. And so, it's the work, basically, right? Thinking about how to stay present to all of the changes around.
Thank you so much.
We have our question here, and then the one that was up there. Oh.
Hi, it's been wonderful hearing you speak. But you've made a lot of key points tonight in terms of, building the community and just, your experience through, the art world and growing up and everything. And you seem really excited about what you're talking about. And I always think that's the most important, when you can tell that someone cares about what they discuss and what they do. And I'm wondering what keeps you excited? What is the most exciting part of your day? What, when you go to sleep at night, what are you like, I'm ready to wake up the next morning and do,
Yeah, thank you. Look, what keeps me excited always is art and artists, really. And yes, there are different ways of this trajectory of my career. There are different moments where, my energy has been in different kinds, right, of making and being. So right now it is in this process of building our building, but it's still all tied and rooted to art and artists. And that is what made me want to be a curator, and that's what continues, right, to inform the work that I do.
Can we squeeze in one more person who I think we got confused who was going to be a question, so we'll ask her, and then my friend up, can you come down so we'll be closer? Yeah, and then those will be our, and there's one over here.
Okay, you know what? Come on, let's go.
Okay, I'll be
We're gonna
brief.
start
I'll be
here.
super quick.
Go for it.
Okay, I'm going in. All right. So I'm hi, thank you so much for everything today. I'm going to circle back to the beginning, the head of the conversation. We were talking about this idea of public art versus monuments and the idea of being monumental, which was super interesting to me because that's a privilege. To be able to be seen that way, and also with the distortion of legacy and work and bodies of work, I was curious to pick your mind and see if there is a way to separate the two, especially because we are aware that narratives surrounding Black artists are, how will I say this on a microphone? I'll say distorted again, because that's on the tip of my tongue. But that is not always a true reflection of struggle and work and passion and intelligence and discovery. So how can you separate what's been done to one's legacy from their work in a way that uplifts them in a space like your museum?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if I have an answer to that, because I know exactly what you're saying, but I think there's nuance in that, like how you do that, seems it's care work. The Latin root of curator is to care, right? And I think that's the part of the work that requires not a solution, right? But the sort of careful, considered tending right? That often isn't the work that surfaces publicly, right? You don't see that in presentation, but it is what then perhaps makes possible to untangle, right, the roots of where your question come from.
We'll have you, and then there's someone here, right? Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for everything that you've said this evening. It's been a wonderful keynote. Also really wonderful because I come from a Hispanic community in the Bronx, so felt a little bit like home. But throughout my time at RISD, only one semester so far, but I've kind of been thinking about how I can understand museums and kind of go beyond like the white wall of a museum and kind of all the heaviness that comes from that. And so I've been really fascinated. You keep saying that you're making a museum, you make museum in this community. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on that phrase and just like what that means to you as a curator, as a director, and maybe how that definition has changed throughout your very long career.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think, I have been in the museum field at a time where, these ideas of what museums should be have changed radically. But I would say, I have been radicalized by younger people in the field who really, in that spring and summer of 2020, call museums to account, and in many cases proposed what sounded often like the destruction of them all, right? The idea they're fundamentally broken. And in those moments, what I was forced always to push was the fact that that's not what I think the answer is, but what I am so eager to see is what the definition of museum is in the hands of the generation for whom this model no longer works, right? Because that's what the Studio Museum founders did. There was a model, but they took the name, and that was strategic, right? Because they understood they were kind of doing some equity work. So they said, this is a museum, and we are going to preserve and present and interpret the work of Black artists. We're going to write them into the art histories they've been excluded from. We're going to lift them up in ways, right, that allow their stories to be told. So I think what it means for me now is that's what I want to see. That's what I know that this generation working now is going to imagine. And when people ask me, what am I excited about? I'm excited to see that, right? What this form will take in the hands of brilliant young professionals in this field.
Thelma Golden, thank you so much for your work, for your life, for your legacy.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask if you could share a little bit about what goes into designing exhibitions over the course of a year. Could you just share a couple of key questions that the museum staff will ask, the curators will ask? What are you looking for? What information would be helpful for the students who are here to know? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. I think what we are always looking for is in work the possibility to see through an artist's work the opportunity to create an experience for an audience with that artist's work and through their vision and their voice. Now, sometimes that can fall into larger categories of exploration we might be involved or invested in, but generally, it's very broad. And, I know it would feel simpler to people sometimes if I could say, we really only show artists that put blue on the right side of their canvases. That's the secret, right? And because sometimes people tell me things, and they say things like that to me. Like I know only artists who, and there's a long line, and and then I'll look and I'll see, actually you might have been able to make that assumption if you were really looking at things super close, but it's not that at all. We try in the program to engage diversity. We try in the program to balance the past and the present. We try in the program to look at ways to open up new space of thought through the intellectual work that can happen around an exhibition. And most importantly, we look for, can we create an opportunity that is going to be significant at an inflection point for an artist, right? Whatever that might be, inclusion in a group show, single artist project, a commission. And all of that is also sort of thought about through a larger lens of the larger history of the institution, right? What we hope will be a way that what we do can tell a story of a moment.
So I know I had like 1,000 more questions to ask, and I'm sure the audience does too, but we want to thank you so much for your generosity.
I want to thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you, Nichole.
Thank you so much. And we have Tony wants to have the final word.
Thank you, Tony.
Thelma, thank you so much for joining us today. And folks, what you experienced on the stage is the generous spirit that we experienced all day today. Our students, our faculty community, our museum curators. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yes. And this would not be an MLK celebration. We certainly want to honor the legacy of Dr. King, but the spirit of this program is to also salute those who have made such an impact in the world, and in particular our community. So we want to offer you just some tokens of love. You can run that. To say thank you for your generous spirit in joining us today. Thank you for your work in the struggle. Thank you for doing your part in the struggle. And please know that you always have a place here. You always have a home here, whether it is to rest or hide in our museum or to partner with us in the work that you're doing. Know that this place is also your place. Thank you. Please, can we thank Thelma Golden for being here today and for her incredible work through the Studio Museum in Harlem and art all around the world. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and good night.